I just couldn't believe it. I thought, there's no way out of here. You know, you're gonna die.
Surviving Black Hawk Down might just be the most cinematic documentary I've ever seen. Or at least the interviews alone in that film are. They're absolutely stunning. So much so I paused while I was watching the film and had to go Google the DP while I was admiring these incredible setups. And of course, the person who shot this is none other than Stefano Ferrari.
My mantra is that you don't have excuses in the cinema or in the screening room. Sometimes when it comes to motivate lighting, I light from the outside, from windows. So I use broader strokes. So the windows need to feel correct. Saida interview was a massive lighting setup.
Really?
Yeah, in that corner, there were two 4K bars shooting into this 12 by white wall. That was the corner wall. And then through an unbleached muslin.
The first thing that makes the cinematography stand out in this documentary is none of these interviews actually feel lit, except for maybe the exception of the one on the roof, but that's another conversation that Stefano and I will talk about. But you can see how he lit all these spaces from the exterior. It doesn't ever feel like there's just a soft box in the room really close to the subjects. I find often in documentary interviews, people feel encased in a space. It feels like they're in a studio that is surrounded by lights, probably like my YouTube shot right now. And yes, this can look good, but it limits how and where you can position the camera. Actually, I have a whole video about interview lighting naturally, which I can link to it right now. Stefano, welcome to the channel. It's an absolute pleasure to finally get the chance to talk with you. As I've mentioned in the upfront, your work is stunning. It is by far the most cinematic and most evocative, inviting interviews I've seen in a film. So many of your interviews, you're embracing the natural lighting. I think of a lot of the Rangers, there was times where you would have the windows in the background or just felt like big swaths of daylighters coming in there. Your lighting is so consistent. And I don't know how much of this is changing in the color grade, but it just feels like you're lighting for what I'm imagining are a couple hour-long interviews based on how good these interviews are. How are you keeping that lighting so consistent? What are you thinking about really practically? Do you just shoot in the middle of the day, or you mentioned, are you tenting your windows? Can you talk even just about practically how you achieve that?
So I tend to tent to not lose all the air that I have left on my head, because as you know, it's like if you start shooting, it's cloudy day, and then all of a sudden the day clears out. Then as a DOP, when you're sitting looking at the monitor and you start seeing like this massive shift of light, that's probably one of the worst nightmares you can have. Because at that point, you've established a certain kind of lighting. You can't just go back and relight. You don't have the time. So usually, you know, the nature of these format, when you're shooting master interviews for series especially, you end up shooting around 7 hours. So straight, you know, lunch break, but 7 hours. So you need to have lighting continuity because a lot of times you end up going into night. So I do tend to use bounced light. So I tend to have, you know, usually 12 bys or 8 by ultra bounce, and then close the tent, and then have, you know, depending on how big or how sourcey I want the window to be, it's like I'm usually around the M40 units, or, you know, let's say if we take the window of Surviving Black Hawk Down, the Delta Force, that was, I think, an 8 by 4 window. So it was quite wide. And so we needed a 12 by frame mounted on top, literally on top of the window, right? And then angle that frame just slightly, so the light that it's bounced off that 12 by ultra bounce could get inside the location. Then what we do is that we skirt on all the angles that are still exposed to the exteriors, and we cover it with other 12 bys rags, ultra bounce rags. And so that creates pretty much a white box in the interior of the tent and a black box on the exterior of the tent. The purpose of this is to avoid any kind of lighting from the sun coming direct. And then inside the tent, I usually shine a single source or two different sources depending on how much control I want to have or how much power I want to have from that bounce light. Now with the new aperture system, the 2600, I think I've been using more and more LED and moving away from HMIs, but on Black Hawk Down, due to the availability of stuff, especially in Africa, we shot with 4K powers rather than LED lights. But usually like strong lights being bounced off and coming in soft. In case, a lot of times that you're dealing with issues of power, maybe you don't want to bring a Jenny. And in that case, you might want to go with multiple units inside. I think the reason why ultimately I like to do this kind of lighting quite consistently, it's because of the fall off of the lighting, especially in the location. So you want to have like a continuous smooth fall off, especially when you're lighting people, when you're side lighting, especially. You don't want the light to be, to have a contrast ratio that it's just unnatural. That would make the lighting feel sourcey. And I think that defeats kind of the purpose of a naturalistic approach. If the window is in frame, you need to treat the window in a certain way. You possibly don't use the window as your main source, because then you have issues with exposures. That window ends up being a bit too hot. There's been instances where I put branches of trees and stuff to give you the sense that there is stuff behind in that window, and it's not just a lighting source.
Everywhere I looked around me is, people screaming to try and give commands, but I couldn't hear anything. It was just gunfire and RPG explosions, one after the other. It was nonstop.
The next point is the locations. They are a character as much as the people are in the interviews. There's times like this interview inside this car or from outside of this diner. Not only is this just high quality cinematography, but it places the characters in environments that are akin to their own lives. You really do feel like you're sitting down with them in their home or in their taxi cab that they drive. These were bold choices, and as Stefano will tell us in the interview, at times they were very challenging, but they did pay off. One thing I wanted to know right away with your work in this film, Stefano, is the locations. How much influence do you have on those locations? Because they always seem to be so in line with someone's home, their dwelling, who they are. Can you talk about that location scouting process?
Yeah, so I think location scouting is probably the hardest part of this job. At least I find it to be the hardest part, meaning the part that is the most time consuming, the one that you put the most thought, and the one that you question yourself. Does this feel right? It's right for the character? Am I looking at this location just because I know it will look good cinematically speaking, but does that fit the story? So it's like you kind of, ask all these questions to yourself. And obviously for me, locations are fundamental because I tend to light the area rather than light characters. And sometimes when it comes to motivate lighting, I light from the outside, from windows. So I use broader strokes rather than boxed, lighting that will light the character, and then have other units that will light the kind of backgrounds or foreground. So I try to go with bigger strokes, and so the windows need to feel correct. Obviously, we don't have massive budgets on these films, so it's not that you can have cherry pickers. So usually the homes need to be, ground floor, and where you can tint the windows and all of that. When it comes to choosing locations, I am not somebody that per se is looking for the massive amount of depth. I don't need to have frame within the frame, within the frame, within the frame. On American Nightmare, we shot with a white wall behind or a beige wall behind. You mentioned the Saida interview. Saida interview was a massive lighting setup. I mean,
really?
Yeah, massive. Like, it was not in terms of, in that corner, there were two 4K bars shooting into this 12 by white wall. That was the corner wall. So it was a quarter diffusion first, intermediate, and then an unbleached muslin. And then I had to basically cover, that was a courtyard of a home. I had to cover all the courtyard with negative, with black, so the sun wouldn't come in. So I created my sun in that corner, and then so it was a lot of work. Yeah, I still remember my first AC, which is the closest person I have on set, and it's somebody that I have shot several films together. He was saying, Stefano, why do you need 4K for this? And I said, yeah, I do need them. I really do.
The aircraft starts to spin violently out of control. We hit the ground hard.
Should mention also that I spoke with Stefano for well over an hour, and we're actually putting that unedited full interview into our Cinepath Pro course, which is the latest course being released, part of our academy, The Art of Documentary. And in that interview, we get into the nitty-gritty details of what specific gear he's using and the latest transition he's making with his own equipment and the lenses and cameras that he loves most, and also just how he gets these Netflix films. We're also going to be having Stefano on our monthly industry expert call, where you got the chance to do a live Q&A with him, and that's for our members, part of the Art of Documentary. As I mentioned, that Cinepath Pro course will be released this May. It's a course with Nick Pilecki, which is going to give you the pathway to becoming a full-time DP. How to do this all without having to be hustling on social media, but actually be shooting the films you're most passionate about and getting the amazing commercial work that aligns with your vision. If you want more information on this or just free lessons sent directly to your inbox every week, we have our AOD newsletter down below that you can join for free. The next point is that Stefano never compromises on his interviews. This isn't really a teaching point, but it's something for you to take from this interview. I know so often I'll just show up on a documentary and find an appropriate place in the house that works good enough, but Stefano will study the locations, and he will still use someone's real life location. He makes sure that these locations are a reflection of that person. They are their home. He does so much pre-production up front that you'll find out of how he's actually able to approach these spaces, so that in a few hours he can accomplish the most cinematic, beautiful setups that can stand beside any other footage and any other film.
Ultimately, Mark, it's, to me, my mantra is that you don't have excuses in the cinema or in the screening room. You just can't say, oh, well, I didn't have enough time, I didn't have enough people to do that. I find it very hard to compromise, meaning, like, if they tell me, Stefano, well, I don't have enough people to build the tent, then I'll go and build the tent with you. I want that tent up. I want to make sure that I have the lighting continuity that I need.
Can you talk about, when you're choosing these locations, Stefano, how much of the character's backstory are you letting influence it? Or how much of it is just based on access to, hey, we can shoot in their kitchen, this is the biggest, widest shot? How are you coming up with these locations?
I think it all comes down to story. It all comes down, I know we filmmakers might sound like a broken record, but ultimately it's the feeling that I get on the script. And it's true, not all the time you have characters that are willing to travel or to be shot somewhere else that is not their place. And if that's what it is, you need to roll with it, because ultimately in documentaries, content is king. You can't have the visuals deciding, I think interviews will be powerful, not because of the work that I do. I can help elevating that, but ultimately it's the content. So you want your characters to feel comfortable, and if that's at their place, then you need to find a place within their spaces that could work for you. Now, obviously, whatever choice will be informed by story. There is never a choice for me that it's based on look. I think it's embracing the imperfection of things that it elevates also your work as a cinematographer.
Can you talk about the Nur Hassan interview? This was one of my favorites from the film. Actually, I mean, truly, there's things about every interview in this that I really appreciate. But in that car, my two questions was why, And then my second was, how did you not keep him from sweating? You're in a country that's, I believe, sub-Saharan, like you're right near the equator in Somalia, a hot country. Why shoot in the car, with all the challenges that would bring?
Yeah, so I think the car was two reasons. First of all, because in today's world, the guy is a taxi driver in Somalia.
Oh, yeah.
So it felt right to have him. It was a chance for us to see around by shooting B-roll with him in the car. Now, bear in mind, we shot the film in Kenya. We couldn't shoot in Somalia. We just couldn't bring crews to Somalia. The situation, risk assessment.
I was actually
Netflix,
really wondering that. I was like, man, how are these guys setting up, 12 by 12 lights and gaffing in Somalia? Like that's a country that has a huge security risk.
Yeah. No, we shot in Kenya and we shot in the coastal area of Kenya. And that was one of the reasons. And the second reason is because the first time it was his first encounter with the American troops was when he was a car and stopped at a control point, at a checkpoint. And so it kind of tied to the past. So it was a way to tell, this is a taxi driver today, but, his first encounter, and that's where he developed his, let's call it hate for the American occupation, because, the guy wasn't doing anything wrong. But then it was beaten up at that checkpoint. So it felt relevant for us to put him inside a car. I think the hardest one was the one on the, in terms of heat, was the one of the woman.
I was about to ask you, Halima. Yeah, tell me, that was my next question, was how challenging was Halima's interview? To me, it was stunning. And I also wanted to know if you recovered the sky in post, or if you just used polarizers, because it was stunning how rich the sky was, how colorful. It was a beautiful interview, but that one seemed very challenging.
Yeah, so we did use polars for two reasons, because polarizer help not only with the sky, but help also with skin, especially on black skin. It helps quite a bit with shyness, and that interview was quite, the heat was quite intense because the sources were quite close. And at this point were direct, going through diffusion, but were direct on the characters. So they create quite a bit of heat. And then we had a muslin tent on top. So we could create the diffuse sunlight and then have our directional sun. We used the usual 2.4Ks through diffusion, but that was an interview that, it was quite hot, quite windy. But, when you have units at like 7-8 feet from you, it's like it gets quite hot. And I was surprised how she could stand it.
And my last point is Stefano lit these interviews for tone and not necessarily visibility. That doesn't mean he just placed people in dark spaces. You can see the details of the room. And it's especially impressive how Stefano can always just put someone in a corner and it's still one of the most cinematic shots that you'll ever see. But the way he approached this lighting is it reflects what was going on internally. And this is very important because this is a complex film with people wrestling with complex emotions. It's showing that there are no winners in war, but only victims, people who've been affected by this. And you can especially see this with the soldiers who are wrestling with the morality of what they've just been through. It's challenging to describe, but it's more felt. And this is where you can feel the artistry of Stefano, that he isn't just going to say what looks best on our characters, but how does it reflect what they're feeling?
I think ultimately, if we talk about morality and, I think at the end of the day in war, there are only victims, it's these people, the American soldiers are following orders. I can tell you they don't want to be there and killing people. Like that's not what they sign up for. They sign up for defending their country. And on the other side, instead, you have regular people that are forced to pick up arms and fight. So I think on both sides, people have done things that they wish they hadn't done. They have things that they regret deeply, things that they will have to live for the rest of their lives. Yeah. And I think our job when it came to interview those people, is to have the least amount of bias we could possibly have. It would have been too easy to interview the Americans and give them this platform and making them, look completely different from, and there is a difference from the Somali interviews to the American ones. And I think what we want to explore with the American side of things is the stillness of life that this soldier end up getting into after, you get off the battlefield. I mean, the battlefield, it's like you're wired in. It's almost like a video game. It's like people shooting left and right, and you're wired in, and you know what you need to do. But you're not even yourself. You're a killing machine. And then you get back home, and you're asked to become the human that the people have known you for. But then that's where you start dealing with PTSD and, that's post-traumatic stress.
Is there one interview that you're most proud of from Surviving Black Hawk Down?
It's probably cinematically not the best, but I think Hamed 5 for the content, for the close-up, I find him very sincere. And this is not because of my lighting. It's not because of, my framing. But I found that I could believe him 100%. And so I think I was able just to elevate his story. That makes it, to me, an interview where I feel I succeeded as a cinematographer. In terms of visuals, probably the one on the rooftop, it sounds like, initially in pre-production, I've lost a few hours of sleep thinking, oh gosh, I mean, continuity and stuff. But then when we were on set on that day, and my director challenged me, and I took the challenge and saying, let's do it up there. And on my thesis, this is where I took a little bit of creative licensing. I'm from Italy. People tends to dry stuff on clothing, lines. And on my thesis, I've done this film in Bushwick, which is an area in Brooklyn, where this kid was, running around all these, bed sheets that are drying out. Something that doesn't happen in America. At least it happens only maybe in Naples or, in Rome. But I thought that, in Somalia, they would do something similar. And so, we put all those rags in the back drying. And that felt like it would have
beautiful.
A little bit.
It was the touch that made it feel less sterile. It felt, to use an overused term in cinematography, organic. Stefano, thank you for your time. Thank you for explaining what you've done, and thank you just for the work you create. You've, in many ways, for me, rescued the art of documentary interviews. It feels like so many films are that I'm seeing on these streaming platforms are being rushed and hurried and put into a bit of a sausage factory in terms of just, they rubber stamp the interviews. We just get someone looking down the lens, we have one big key source, and we have a gray background or whatever. Or sometimes I've seen some really big documentaries where it just feels like, I don't know, the interview is just haphazardly put together, and I appreciate that, you're watching a film that Ridley Scott's produced, like Surviving Black Hawk Down, where your interviews stand right up against all of the cinematic footage that's put in there, all of the dramatic stuff, and you haven't compromised on the quality of your interviews. So bravo to the work you're doing. It's an incredible portfolio you're putting together, and I hope that we get the chance to collaborate someday.
I love that, and thank you for having me, and thank you for the so many good words. I mean, I really appreciate that.
And I've come to realize that some things in life are just never settled. You learn to live with it.
Huge shout out to Stefano. I learned so much from him in this conversation, especially just not compromising on your interviews. I know I so often just do my setups quick in documentary and you make them look good enough, but he makes them look great. They look as good as any other shot in the film, which I think elevates the entire storytelling overall. If you want more from Stefano, we're doing breakdowns in the art of documentary. That's our course on Academy. We'll have him in our Cinepath Pro course. That's a new course, which is the guide to becoming a full-time DP. We'll be breaking down a bunch of his work in there, including from a variety of his other films like American Nightmare. But thank you for watching this far. If you have made it this far, leave this emoji below.
I'm not gonna do that.
Appreciate it as always. Thank you, and we'll see you on the next one.